story that you might not have read much in the Bible. Esther is a book in the Bible in the Old Testament, right before Job. And they never mentioned the word God once in this book. This is very unusual. However, you always knew that it was about God because the Jews worshiped the one and only God. And so this is true history. We're going to talk about the town of Susa was in Iran, and there's ruins there now from that. So these are real places and real people. So I sort of started telling you the story. Let me give you the little background when I did the children's story. And it was that Queen Esther, and she had a Jewish name that we can't pronounce, so we're just going to keep calling her Queen Esther. But she was adopted because her parents had died, and her cousin, Mordecai, must have been a lot older than her. He raised her. And it wasn't really your choice. We said it the nice way for the kids, a beauty contest, but they went out to see who was going to be in the king's harem, the prettiest girls, and one was going to get to be the queen. And so you didn't really have a choice in this matter. This was just how it was. And so they gathered all the young girls in and gave them beauty treatments for a year. So after a year, maybe you look pretty good, even if you hadn't started out that way. But she came before the king, and she was chosen as the queen. And so basically she lived in the palace. But the whole time, her uncle was coming to the fence there and still giving her advice. And he said, don't tell anyone that you're Jewish. Okay, because they had been captured and brought there. And so they were the minority and not liked. He said, don't tell anyone you're Jewish. So she kept to that the whole time. And then when someone was against the Jews, and it seems like the Jews always get picked on, don't they? The people are really against them. They wanted to kill all the Jews. And then that was the time her uncle said, now's the time. And she was afraid. Of course she was. And he said, but maybe you've been put here for such a time as this. Has anyone ever heard that phrase before? That's a famous phrase from this book. Maybe you were there for such a time as this. Each one of us. We sometimes think our life has these random things happen. And it doesn't always seem like they're the good things. Having your parents die and then have to be adopted, that doesn't always seem like the greatest thing, but God has a plan. So such a time as this, God has a place for you. And that's what we want to remember through Esther. So up here we're going to remind ourselves that God asks us to use our area of influence for God's purposes, for His righteousness and goodness. If you think back on your life, are there times that you just came across somebody and you were able to help them for such a time as this? Can you think of maybe little things? We don't all get to be the queen, and you don't want to get to be the king, but you've done little things and you've helped somebody, and we don't know that made all the difference for them. So I told you that story of being in that class to learn about mental health, and this young lady was expressing her faith, and none of us said what our backgrounds were. She didn't know I was a pastor. She didn't know anybody else there believed like her. But she just said, I know God's going to take care of us. What faith? She didn't have us. She had to leave, and I've helped people as a social worker before, had to leave with the clothes on her back. He wouldn't let the kids take their clothes, not a pot or pan, nothing. And she had faith. And she kept saying in class, I know God's going to take care of me. Now, does that take a lot of faith? So on a break, I said, hey, I'm a pastor. And our church will sponsor you. And we'll make sure you get some things taken care of. So we never know. And you never know. When you put the money in play, you didn't know that you were going to help somebody who wanted to be a good Christian. She wanted to stay married. But it just wasn't going to happen. And so we were able to help her. And so such a time as this, over and over again, little things happen, and we just happen to be able to be there. And maybe our little thing that we say or do is going to be remembered to help someone. So God says, think about this. Your life is not just for yourself. When colleges were made, they were made to begin with to train people to be pastors or to say what your calling is. Okay, so every one of us has a calling. You don't have to be a pastor to have a calling. Whatever job that you're doing, or if you're in retirement now, God has a call on your life. He said, you're not living for yourself now that you're a Christian. Right? When we get baptized, we say, die to self, live for Christ. So whatever we do, it tells us in the scripture, do your job, do whatever you do each day, do it as you are doing it for the Lord, not just for yourself. Don't just say, what's going to make me the most comfortable? Comfort doesn't always happen, does it? Not just comfort, not what is going to make me the happiest. No, it's not about that. When you're a Christian, you said, I give my life to the Lord. I don't just offer a few dollars or a lot of dollars, doesn't matter, but we say, Lord, you died for me, Jesus, and I'm going to live for you with your help. And we say the Psalm 23. How many people think they have that memorized? You know, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He leads me in what? Paths of righteousness for his name's sake. That's what our life is. It's not just about us. He leads us in paths of righteousness so that his name will be proclaimed and people will know who the Lord is, and more people will follow that, and thy kingdom come. So that's what Esther was called to do here. She was called to realize that her area of influence was to be used for God's purposes. Let's go on to the next one there. Mark. But she knew that this was a scary thing, and you don't do God's will without God. Does that seem sort of obvious? How many times you get all these warnings on packages? This is the stupidest things. Don't do this. Who would even think of it? How many think of one of those warnings you get on packages that you're thinking, why does someone even say this? Can anyone think of one right now? But you get them all the time, you think, why do they have to write this down? But why do we have to say we don't do God's will without God? And in the church, we can't forget to pray. So Esther says, I'm not doing this unless everybody's praying. She said, they would fast. They fasted too. For 3 days, they fasted and they focused on prayer. And she asked everybody, all the Jews, who should do that with her. So she wasn't going to try to do God's will without God. So first of all, you have to ask God to help you. And you know it's his plan to do good. So he wants to help you. If you ask for something to do good, you don't have to wonder if that's God's will or not, right? Whenever you want to help the poor, you don't have to wonder, is that God's will? There's over 2,000 verses in the Bible about helping the poor, so we can be sure that that's God's will when we try to do that. And if we ask for help, that will happen. So Esther asked for all these people to pray, and she prayed too. And there's other verses in the Bible that tell us all the time, don't give up on praying. In Luke 18, it talks about a story about an unjust judge. And it said, this judge didn't want to give anybody real help. This wasn't in the United States. This was years ago. And so widows years ago did not have any help. They did not have, if you didn't have a husband, you had no rights at all. So the widows that kept going to the judge and asking for help and asking for help. And he didn't care about justice. He said, but this woman is wearing me down. So I'm going to give her what she's asking for. And said, God is not unjust. He wants to give good gifts. So you think if you ask and you're sincere and you put God first, you are going to be able to accomplish the good that God has called you to. But sometimes we offer what I would call wimpy prayers, and I've been guilty of it too. It's just sort of half-hearted and thrown out there. But God doesn't always promise to answer wimpy prayers. As in Jeremiah 29, it says, you will seek me and find me when you seek me with your whole heart. And in the Message Bible it says, when I'm top priority. top priority of your day, of your life, that's when God is going to answer the prayers. And it doesn't mean that he's going to answer and everything's going to turn out perfect. We know that. But it's going to be that we'll be able to accomplish God's will. We'll be able to accomplish God's will. So here's Esther. She didn't have some choices. She didn't get to choose that she had to live away from her family in the palace. She didn't get to choose where she'd get to live. She didn't get to choose that her parents had died, but she trusted still yet that God was good and that when he asked for something and you prayed. So she said, I'm going to do it. And so the next slide tells us to be God's servant, we've got to be willing to take a risk. Take a risk. To do good and accomplish God's will, it often involves taking a risk. It will take courage. So she said if she went to the king without being called, she could die because that was the king's priority. He could say, I didn't call you here. And so you could just be killed on the spot. So she had to trust that with the prayer, she would put it out there. And that's what faith is. You don't know for sure what's going to happen. Sometimes in the church, people want to tell you that. Now, if we do this project, are you sure that's going to work? No, I'm not sure. If I knew for sure, it wouldn't take faith. What I'm going to do is, if we think it's God's will, we're going to step out in faith and we're going to try to do it. And then we're going to let God, see what he wants to do with that. So that's what Esther did. She didn't know for sure. It was a good deed. It was the right thing, but she didn't know it was going to work. And because we know not every time does God deliver his people out of things. Sometimes we're right in it. But she was willing to put her life there. And she said, her uncle said, at such a time as this, maybe you were placed there for this reason. Maybe even you were sitting next to somebody in the doctor's office for this reason, that you were going to say something that was going to inspire them. Or maybe you were at the grocery store for that reason, or maybe you were at your job for that reason, that you were going to do something or say something that was going to give them hope. We're all here for such a time as this. God is not wasting any of our lives. And people wonder, now, why am I here? Just believe that when you promise to follow God, your life has meaning and purpose. Especially when you say, I'll put you first, Lord. You'll be my top priority. Use my life how it will. I might live, I might die, but whatever it is, this is what Esther was willing to say. Living or dying, and Apostle Paul said the same thing, living or dying, I live or die for Christ. So be brave, dream big dreams, it says in the church, and don't just look with your eyes, look with eyes of faith. This is what Esther did. So we all have something that God is working each day. It might be little things. And we've told, you can probably think of stories too where people helped in a little way and they never knew how much it really helped you. So at such a time as this, each one of us have a call on our life. And we are seeing over and over again each Sunday the heroes of the faith. Some of them are little. Some of them are like this young lady. Some are old, very old, like Noah. We said 120 years old. Some are very old, some are young, some are teenagers, some are adults, some are little kids. But God calls each of us to dedicate our lives to him. And as we do, for such a time as this, God calls us. And we don't know what difference that's making, but it's making in God's kingdom. And we hear, a few times we hear stories, but lots of times we don't, but we trust that God is making a difference in people's lives. Over and over again. I thank you, church, that it wasn't hard to give a lady $50 a delivery of furniture, pots, and pans, plates, for her little 8-year-old girl and her 13-year-old boy. I thank you, church, that you're generous. And I knew it would be okay. I don't think I even asked anyone's permission. I thank you, church, that we know when we can help somebody, we're going to. And God will bless that. He will bless us for doing his will. And we can be sure of that. He's promised that. Let's pray together.